Hello, everyone. We're going to get started now. Welcome to what I'm sure will be a fantastic discussion on broadband champions and what makes them effective. I'm Revati Prasad, the Vice President of Programs at the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. For those who may not know of us, we are a 40-year-old nonprofit focused on broadband policy, working to make sure everyone can use and benefit from high-quality, affordable broadband. Part of my role at Benton, maybe the best part, is to run the Marjorie and Charles Benton Opportunity Fund Fellowship. We established the fellowship for our 40th anniversary, a time which also coincided with the pandemic that demonstrated the continuing digital inequities in our country and the immense federal investments to address those needs. The Opportunity Fund puts out an annual call. The next one will be coming in the summer, July, and we are looking to support research projects, often practitioner-led, that will help us understand ground realities, design better programs, and demonstrate what makes a real difference in people's lives. It is such a thrill to present the culmination of one of our fellowships from our very first cohort, the work of Dr. Pierrette Renee Dagg. Pierrette is the Director of Research at Merit Network, and for her fellowship project, she leveraged her prior work with Michigan communities to examine the work of broadband champions. She was working off of an insight that an energized, motivated champion tended to be a deciding factor in whether communities were able to meet their broadband goals. And she wanted to understand more about who these champions were, what they did, and what makes them successful. So over the past year, she did profiles of these champions and then analyzed her data across communities to see what they had in common. Her report, Could It Be Me? Should It Be Me? Understanding What Makes Broadband Champions, is now available on the Benton website, as are the individual profiles she did. Please do check it out. Today, Pierrette will be telling us about how she did this work, but also we will be meeting some of the broadband champions that she profiled for her report. That's enough preamble. I'll be bringing on Pierrette shortly, and then we'll take it from there. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We will leave time for questions in the end, but those of you watching this on YouTube can submit questions in the comment section as you think of them. Me and our producer, Grace, will keep an eye out and bring them into our discussion as we can. Also, to our panelists, we have so much to get through. And really, that's because of all of your work. So really, you only have yourselves to blame. But there might be moments I need to exercise some moderator privilege and ask you to wrap it up. Whatever you're saying at that particular moment, my apologies in advance. All right. Bringing on Pierrette now. Hi, Pierrette.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome. So can you tell us a little bit about the work you did for this fellowship?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, the IIJA allocated billions of dollars to improve broadband deployment across the entire US. And as all these communities have been working on building their own broadband solutions, leveraging that funding and other funding, I really wanted to study what made for successful efforts that were responsive to community needs. So through my work at the Michigan Moonshot, which is an initiative at Merit Network that seeks to positively impact the digital divide, I really observed, as you mentioned, that in every community that has shown significant advancement in ubiquitous broadband connectivity, a single or perhaps two broadband champions had been present. And by studying the commonalities and the differences that contributed to all of their approaches and the lessons and the tactics that they used, the research in the report really demonstrated that pretty much anybody can emerge as a broadband champion. I do have a handful of slides that I would love if you could show for me. The first slide that I'd like to show just demonstrates, if we move to the next one, the broadband champions. Oh, one more there. The champions that we highlighted in the study. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is just to demonstrate the broad nature of the participants. So we have everyone from sixth-generation family farmers who also served as county commissioners, people who worked at ISDs as tech directors. We've got people who were not employed in official capacities until well into their broadband journeys. We've got citizens and residents. So it's a pretty wide swath. On the next slide, I also just want to demonstrate, this is all just to caveat a lot of the work. While it may not look that these communities are geographically diverse, what I would share is that we've got some communities in the Eastern Upper Peninsula, which can be incredibly rural. So we're talking just a handful of residents per square mile. We've got communities along the west side of the state. These are primarily agricultural communities and some tourism communities. And then we've got a few communities towards central South Michigan, and those represent counties that have both dense urban areas and then also rural areas, and all experience a mix of affluence and also some challenges in terms of socioeconomics. Before we introduce the champions and I bring this back over to you, the other thing, if you move on one more slide, I just want to demonstrate, I'm sorry, one more after that. There we go. Broadband champions, just to define who they are people who play pivotal roles in promoting and enhancing broadband access in the community. So this could be through efforts like advocacy, strategy, education, leadership, and community engagement. And one of the other reasons, one of the other big drivers for doing this research and working with the Benton Institute, these community champions, is that I've worked with communities all across Michigan and throughout the United States. And over again, I run into people who say that they would love to do something to further access or connectivity or digital skills in their community, but they're just overwhelmed. And they say they can't help because they lack the necessary experience to make an impact. They don't have an official job role. Maybe they've never had any specialized training. And the thing that really came across in all of this is that none of that mattered. So technical know-how or ability, whether or not they held an official responsibility within a municipality or whether or not they saw themselves a leader, did not make a difference. The things that did matter were personal qualities, how they overcame the opposition to their efforts, and their general commitment to the cause.
That was my favorite first insight that you gleaned from your research, that technical know-how wasn't that important. This would be a great moment to start to introduce our champions. I'm going to leave that to you.
All right. So today we've got 3 champions joining us. We've got John Eaglehoff, who is the Executive Director of the Southwest Michigan Planning Commission. Joining him is Jason Kronemeyer, who's the former Director of Technology at the Eastern Upper Peninsula Intermediate School District. And finally, we've got Barb Fuller, who is the former chair of the Washtenaw County Broadband Task Force.
Fantastic. Now, I know that they all were doing, like we've already talked about the varied backgrounds, and that's apparent from just hearing about Barb, Jason, and John. Because although they accomplish different things and their backgrounds are different, they all had to do similar tasks, right? You wrote in the report about and in the individual profiles that all of the champions were educating, communicating, and inspiring their respective communities. I'd love for Pierrette, for you to talk a little bit about that overall work, and then for each of our champions to tell us a little bit about what they did specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're 100% correct there. What we did notice is, although their approaches differed dramatically, the things that they did were actually very similar. So every single one of our champions demonstrate some of these characteristics. So they educated, they communicated, and then they inspired the community around them. Some of the stories that we can talk about, we'll ask our champions to help. But their achievements in these processes varied wildly. So through doing this, they passed local funding measures to obtain investment totaling $20 or $30 million. Some of them leveraged existing middle mile infrastructure. A lot of the similarities that they can talk about will demonstrate how these were really critical to their success. We had education, and that in some cases was through public information campaigns, through data-driven storytelling, and through one-on-one conversations as a way to demonstrate need. We also had communication, and that really plays a very crucial role in gaining allies, establishing partnerships, and securing the support of residents. And this was occasionally done one-on-one, and other times it focused on mass communication tactics. And when our champions inspired, they really worked to build strong relationships to motivate and involve others in the pursuit of a very large and shared common goal. So I think that it would be great to talk just a little bit about the way some of our champions demonstrated those. Barb, could you tell me just a little bit about how you leveraged communication tactics to perhaps encourage everyone to work together?
Sure. My background, just so everyone knows, is not technical. So the point that was made earlier that you don't need to have a technical background to be active and effective in these kinds of activities, it should not be overlooked at all. So communication for me, I come from a political campaign background. So my perspective is, how do you have a goal, a message? Who do you talk to get buy-in from? How do you persuade people to come along with you? Ultimately, because I know we're time constrained here, ultimately, the money that we thought we were going to have to raise came to us in a form of an ARPA grant, American Rescue Plan Act grant money. Totally unexpected. We did our work. This is a 10-year project, it turns out to be. We did our work believing we were going to have to compete for federal dollars. Ultimately, we did not have to. We had to convince our County Board of Commissioners to take money out of their over $72 million that they received through ARPA and put it towards broadband. And ultimately, they committed $14.6 million of that to make the project work. And we are in the midst of deployment countywide by the end of 2026. Communication on my level was very personal. I knew all of the county commissioners because I'd worked with them for years, decades, many of them, convincing them that this is a priority in districts that they didn't necessarily represent, but that it was important for the health and vitality and economic stability of the entire county. It stemmed from the fact that the kids in my school district, which is a very rural area of the county, were gifted Chromebooks. Worked great when they were at school. They went home, they had no access. Or if they did, there was no bandwidth. So they were trying to share a connection with siblings, with parents working from home, all of those kinds of things. So my communication was based on relationships cultivated over years, talking with them directly, bringing them along through the whole process with respect to need and value for the people that live here. That's what communication meant from my point of view. It was leveraging relationships, staying in touch with those people, being a nag. They knew why I was reaching out to them every time. It was a relationship you have to tend to. I liken it to gardening. You can't just plant the seed and walk away. You have to continue to nurture it, explain it, answer questions about it, give them answers for people who would be challenging. Well, I didn't need an internet connection. I graduated from high school just fine. I don't know what the big deal is. Literally, we heard people say that. So communication is key. I believe it needs to be very personal and relationship based, depending on what the funding source is that you need to go after.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw a lot of different examples of communication one-on-one in the report.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, you took an entirely different approach to communicating. So you participated in any type of study that you could join, any type of research, any type of data-driven project in order to communicate and educate. Can you tell me a little bit about how you leverage the data science to educate and demonstrate need in the community, and maybe if you were aware that was necessarily the tactic that you were doing, or if it's just how your thought patterns emerged?
Well, the need to communicate through data really stems back to being part of the educational system, and always let your data speak first, and base your decisions based off of data, and use your data to communicate. We had in the UPISD, we not only focused on communicating with data and participating in data studies, we had a culture of leveraging network to extend the classroom, to close that distance, and communicating the value of being able to learn anything that you want to learn over a network connected to the internet was a powerful communications tool.
Yeah.
But you still had to shift the wants conversation from the wants conversation, because the internet for many years was considered primarily an educational or entertainment tool. Entertaining, it wasn't really wanted as much in society as a learning tool. So one of the things that we did to drive that was we applied for grants specifically to put computers into the home to gather the data to demonstrate the need to get students connected at their homes, because it really wasn't a needs conversation until the technology started getting into the home. In 2016 was really where we hit the tipping point with communicating with data to put things in terms that that people understand.
Yeah, so you leverage science in order to demonstrate the need in the fallow areas of infrastructure.
Yeah. So, and it's not just a need. Where does the need exist? So we partnered with EUP Regional Planning and Development Commission to do a demand survey that correlated from where somebody lives to the need that they have where they live. And that was one of the first studies that we participated in to demonstrate that it was where infrastructure exists. And once you start putting it in terms of where infrastructure exists, you can start understanding the correlating factors to the digital divide and educating people on why the gap exists. And
exactly.
Then local decision makers and local communities, they understand a little bit more readily the conversation about infrastructure and why infrastructure is needed for economic development and the role of connectivity for learning in economic development. So we continued, and we were able to partner with Merit and the Quello Center, MSU Quello Center, on the first Moonshot K-12 study, which drew a correlation between students' performance and career aspirations based on the type of connectivity they had.
Summarize that really quickly, and then I'll move on to John. So in the study that Jason's talking about, it was done in 2020, and one of the very early ways that the Eastern Upper Peninsula was able to demonstrate correlation between students who lacked internet access in their home and a whole measure of outcomes. So those included, if I'm remembering correctly, Jason, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it demonstrated that students without home internet connection were on average achieving a half a letter grade lower, had lower grades on standardized tests, less of an intention to go on to higher education and participate in STEM and STEAM careers. John, could we go over to you now just to stay on schedule? You also had a very challenging job. So as someone who is this NGO organization in a planning commission, you have great power and also a lack of great power by being able to either bring good ideas to the table or at least spark conversation amongst all of the various communities within your planning region. Knowing that you have access to the decision makers and the policy makers, knowing that you can provide information for them, but also knowing that you can't necessarily make anyone take you up on a good idea. How did you leverage, or what did you leverage in order to inspire the communities around you to take action on this?
Yeah, that's a great setup. To me, it was really about, starting to, on the education side and the communication side, both really intersected for me. It was a lot about building a certain level of comfort with intelligence within our organization by tapping a lot of experts and learning the language and understanding, this what used to be an entirely profit-driven ISP world. We learned as we went that in concentric rings. Then I introduced leaders into that conversation, into that intelligence gathering, and gradually we built out that ring of influence, getting important decision makers would eventually have positions where they could pull levers and move money and all that, make important decisions. So we got to a certain level of comfort there. And then when we knew it was time to really communicate broadly, we looked at force multipliers where it was organizations like school districts and foundations and elected officials, economic development practitioners, in this inner ring of sort of force multipliers. When we were ready to move, we reached out to them and said, we want to do this. And they're like, let's do it. And off we went. So it was really about thinking about these concentric rings of influence, educating them, and then, when it's time to move, pulling the right levers.
I think you might be muted, Revati.
Oh, you would think I would know better by now, these many years into the pandemic and remote work. But it's so fascinating to hear Barb, Jason, and John talk about their individual work and how they worked on educating, communicating, and inspiring their communities. But Pierrette, part of what I loved about your analysis was also that you moved a step further and you developed this taxonomy. So talk to me a little bit about how the taxonomy came about, and now that you have been classified as one of the other, I would love to hear from our champions. How does it grab you to be one of the types in Pierrette's taxonomy?
Yeah, so as I started to study all the individual champions, I noticed that they were all demonstrating pockets of characteristics. And those pockets of characteristics tended to fall into one of three models. So they were connectors, multipliers, and visionaries. And none of the champions fell strictly into a single capacity, but they did tend to, at least through my research, exude characteristics that were primarily of one of those types. And I felt that classifying champions and the behaviors and actions that they did into this typology system really provided just one way to think about this whole wide range of approaches that champions can think of, or maybe pick and choose from based on the unique circumstances that they're facing or the characteristics or demographics of their communities. Connectors are people who really believe in the force of meaningful one-on-one relationships. And I would describe this as the human glue that binds people together. And their approach is really rooted in the belief that individual connections can be the most powerful motivators. Multipliers were one of the other taxonomy categories, and they are strategic thinkers who really excel, excuse me, at utilizing various resources. So whether it's a relationship, whether it's knowledge or a material assets, multipliers will use the things around them to strategically advance all of their goals. And they have this really great ability to see beyond the capabilities just within their direct sphere and harness the potential of things around them to contribute to the overall goals. And then the final taxonomy classification was a visionary, and they're distinguished by their long-term thinking. So they set their sights on something very far, a definitive end goal, and they just steadfastly progress towards it. And because they have this very long-term vision, it helps them to stay unwaveringly fixed on the objective. And then when opportunities come by that match that long-term goal, it makes it much easier for them to just pluck the opportunity out of the air and apply it to this relentless forward momentum that they have. So I think it would be a great idea to talk a little bit about how people saw them in their classifications. So John, why don't we start with you? You were classified as a visionary in the typology. How does that grab you? And did you know that's what you were doing at the time, or is this just how your brain as a planner operates?
It's a little, it feels a bit natural to me. So, and I'm not suggesting that being classified as a visionary feels natural. It just feels like that way of thinking where you're 5 to 10 years down the road saying, what do we need to get to? Establish what goals look like in a community, aligning assets to reach those kinds of goals, building a roadmap. That kind of stuff is very stock and trade for planners. And then because we're a regional planning organization, 3 counties wide, that kind of geography also lends itself well to thinking broadly about shared opportunities and shared assets and those kinds of things. So just generally being in that space is a pretty comfortable place. But it's also, I think that vision thing is sometimes about not necessarily always looking 5 to 10 years beyond, but saying, if that's where we're headed, if that's possible, and we think there's ways we can do it, we also have to think beyond, don't be too myopic about the present. Like you're building an agenda for the next meeting. But really what you need to think about is what are the structures that you need to put in place? What kind of, general kind of infrastructure do you need to build around the people so that you can get to that end? And I think that, visionaries who are just floating off in the distance, they're not doing people a whole lot of good if you're not also grounding that in the reality you reside in now and how to build that connection between the two. So that's kind of, I saw that I had opportunities to be both of those people to the folks that I was working with. So, I was in a good spot.
Yeah, John, you said something that was pretty insightful to me when we were talking. And you said, I think we had the quote up a little while ago. You said you had to be comfortable with the pace of change and the arc when you're working as a regional planner. And you're making, in general, plans for 20 or 30 years in the future. And you have to be comfortable being an old man or an old woman before you see a lot of your plans implemented. And I think that really summarizes the visionary typograph.
Yeah.
Jason, go ahead.
I would just add one other thing, in that every once in a while, the distance between that future and the present gets squeezed down. And it's happened with broadband, where I thought we were a long way away from where we were trying to get to. And it turned out that the distance between the planning and the implementation was way closer. And that's extremely satisfying for a planner.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, you were classified as a multiplier, and I think you're going to have to help me choose one of the examples here because there are just so many. So from building a community group of EUP Connect collaborative stakeholders, which encompass more than 45 organizations to come together and leverage their expertise to try to solve problems, to the way that you strategically leveraged E-rate funds and other funding sources to interconnect community anchor institutions to build essentially your own middle mile in the community. I think there are so many ways that you could provide an example of some of the multiplier characteristics that you demonstrated. Could you talk just a little bit about how that struck you, and then maybe how you went about some of these?
Sure. Multiply, for me, multiplying is multiplying through relationships. And I think both John and Barb have talked about the relationships necessary to carry an initiative forward. The more you build relationships, both in your local communities and external to your local communities, the more diverse ideas and more diverse mindset that you have, all working on a common topic. So the relationships, it takes a while to develop trust. So I'm not a planner by nature, And the thought of putting together a plan to carry out an initiative like this so large is mind-bending for me. So you build those relationships, and the more relationships that you have, the more diverse community that you have supporting your initiative, because you develop common ideas. You share ideas. You learn what other champions are out there. Like, we were watching Washtenaw County, because they were one of the leaders in how did they get this done? They're just a few steps ahead of us. So once you develop those relationships, and it goes back to the data, through those relationships, you're able to leverage ideas and research that help inform policy, both at the local and the state and the federal level, to move things forward.
Yeah, you also said something that I think is just general the zeitgeist of someone that acts as a multiplier. When we were talking, you said that you saw the term multiplying is one of the ways that you were raised growing up. So if you help everybody in your community in any way you can, then they tend to do that same thing for you. And I think that you've built up such a network of relationships by approaching things that way, that it was just natural that your entire community would rally behind you as you worked on this for the last, 20 years or so, maybe a little longer.
Yeah, I learned that relationship from my family. I grew up on a family farm. So, it's nature in a community to, when your neighbor needs help, you offer help, both through the farm, through your church, through your community organizations. I learned from my family to be involved and develop those relationships, so that they come and help you when there's something important to you that you're trying to get done. I also have a statement that the EUPISD is the biggest network that has never put a shovel in the ground.
That is a really good way to put that.
We're developing connectivity through connecting our communities to each other.
Yeah.
Through those types of relationships, so that the infrastructure gets built to connect them to the world. Yeah.
Barb, let me go to you. You said something, a couple of things that were really interesting. So you were classified as a connector, and when we talked about that, you described yourself as sticky. You said you were the human glue. You also said some things about doing the hidden work that no one realizes needs to be done, that's critical to get any progress made. Could you tell me a little bit about just what you meant by some of those and how you see yourself as a connector in that role?
Happy to. As a connector, and as someone who operationalizes everything, my goal was to achieve countywide, ubiquitous, affordable, accessible, reliable broadband connectivity for everybody. And to do that, I needed to connect people who were disbelieving that there were people in this county without access, because Washtenaw County is home to the University of Michigan and a couple of pretty substantial healthcare systems. The people in Ann Arbor almost refused to believe that people out where I live didn't have broadband access. Oh, they're too cheap. They wouldn't pay for it. Oh, they really don't care. Oh, they really don't need it. They've got a library. They can look it up, those kinds of things. So as a connector, what I worked to do was introduce people from different perspectives to come to the belief and understanding that A, it was important for everybody to have access, B, that everybody benefits when everybody has access, and to keep people moving forward. My mindset, coming from a campaign background, is I like short time frames. When I got into this in 2013, I didn't set a horizon date. I set a goal and started putting the pieces together to do it. The only reason this worked, one, was we had a very powerful gestalt of individuals that had personal connections, had technical expertise, had actually worked in IT, so they knew what had to plug into what to make it go, and those kinds of things. What I brought, as you mentioned, Pierrette, was the glue. So I scheduled the meetings, I prepared the agendas, I made sure people were on track with what they said they would do or what we needed them to do. So I was herding the cats through the whole thing. It's important to remember that the Washtenaw County Broadband Task Force was entirely volunteer. There was no paid staff for this. So John and Jason, you've got day jobs that paid you to do this work. What we did was done as a work of commitment and love to our community. I'm not trying to boast. I'm just saying you don't have to have 5 paid staff to make things like this go. You just have to have people who identify what needs to be done and are committed and determined to put the pieces together to get there. We did ultimately have some funding for some work groups, for consultants, for some survey work, but the core steering committee, if you want to call it that, none of us were compensated for what we did. The goal was what mattered. We leveraged people we knew, smart people we knew, partners like Merit who came in and were really helpful in ways that I can't even begin to list. But there was a commitment there. We were unstoppable. I didn't know where the end game was or what the date of the end game was, but we were going to get there. Come hell or high water, we were going to get there. And then the ARPA money fell out of the sky and away we went. So
that's actually a great segue, Barb, for our next set of questions. One of the things that Pierrette did in her research was to try and look at the secrets of success. Part of why you chose these communities was because they had, as Barb said, been so successful and they demonstrated this commitment. But looking back, taking a step back and looking at all of their work, Pierrette, what did you find were the secrets to success?
There were 3 that were common amongst everyone. The first one is that they were all storytellers. So whether it was through, for example, Jason's data science, or another example that I really love, Terry Sue Freeling is the commissioner in Berrien County, and she wasn't able to join the webinar today. But my favorite story here is that Terry was also a connector, and she convinced everybody that they needed broadband through telling the stories of how it may actually impact their quality of life and engaging deeply with the community members. So she listened to their individual stories, reassured them that their struggles were common and shared, and then illustrated how broadband could impact their specific issues. And she did this by, in her very rural farming community, she knew that the farmers would all get up and meet at the Circle K at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning every day before they went about their business. So what did she do? Every single day, she was out there at the Circle K drinking coffee before the sun came up. Or if you talk to her teenage daughters, apparently they are very embarrassed by this, but for months, Terry would drag them around on Friday and Saturday nights to every restaurant, every movie theater, every coffee shop, and talk to anybody that would listen about broadband. So she actually immersed herself in her community with her family in tow. Another secret to success is that all of our champions understood that the work of universal connectivity is absolutely a marathon. It is not a sprint. In one county, there are only 472 households in Allegan County out of 440 or 44,000 households that are in total. So she's really looking at trying to solve the connectivity problem still for 400 households. The challenge there that it signifies a lot of success, but the remaining households are in really hard to reach areas, like in the middle of sand dunes in state parks and things like that. So understanding that it's going to take a very long time for some of these things is important. And then the other thing is that all of our champions demonstrated skills and political acumen to navigate a lot of roadblocks. I think champions may have a couple of other things that they might want to add to that as well.
Would any of you want to add any of your secret sauce, if you're willing to share?
Or if we missed anything.
You just have to go. You just have to get after it, quit saying, oh, well, maybe we can't. And I don't have the expertise. I don't know how to do this. Just go, just start, take that step, talk to somebody who might be interested and can help. Just don't be intimidated by the fact that you don't know all the pieces, know all the players, and have all the money in your hip pocket. Just go, because it needs to happen. And it will. Just get after it.
I think Barb's comment about not having a specific deadline in mind made me think about something that I thought about very regularly during our however many years we were doing it. And that was the thing that you most want, John, like the route that you most want to take. And one of the questions that came up on the side here is about community-owned networks. And I thought, what we want is an open access network that answers all the questions. We've got to have that. But I always kept that in the back of my mind. It didn't push it too far forward because the leaders in my community were not ready for that. And I think that ultimately the goal is about serving people and getting them solutions. And if the solution that you think is the best one isn't the one that, politically can work, you have got to pivot and be ready to be flexible. So that might be the political acumen thing. I meant that might be overstating it a little bit for me, but it's just the realization that don't get too married to your solution, because ultimately, if you can get to the destination, you can leave your solution behind and take somebody else's route, because that might be the only way you're getting it.
Yep. Every house matters. And to echo what Barb said, just do it. There's a supporting cast for every leadership initiative in every community. And if you don't call them to action, they will never take action. And the worst idea is the idea not shared.
That's a great point, Jason. Question, we're actually open for questions from our audience. So if you have something you'd like to ask one of our panelists, please do submit it in the YouTube comments. I have several questions, so I'm going to keep going with mine. Jason, to exactly what you just said, for this project, we focused on champions. And of course, Pierrette has argued that they are crucial. But as you just alluded, it's not a one-person job. These leaders need the right environment. They need the right support. They need the right community. Not the right community. They need the support of their community. Perhaps you could all reflect on your relationship with your supporters and what they were able to help you with at crucial moments.
I feel like I'm always jumping in here. When the ARPA money came through and the county got $72 million, we were, euphemistically, we call it shovel ready, right? We had a plan. We could defend it. We had been selling it all along. And it was the fact that we had built trust. They believed us. They didn't think we were in this for personal gain. That really made it possible for us to get them to allocate 14.6 million of that whole pot they were getting over the objections of others who wanted a piece of this and a piece of that, but they weren't ready. So we were in the first round of distributions that occurred. I think there were 4 or 5 ultimately phases of distributing this money. But we had been working since 2013 to build a case for this. It wasn't new. We were ready. And the commissioners who actually had to make the decision, there was one commissioner who this was supposed to be a go in June. It took until September for this vote to actually occur that allocated the money. And County Commissioner Jason Maciejewski, northwest corner of Washtenaw County, pretty much, worked relentlessly behind the scenes to continue to say, how do we get this moving forward? What else do we need to put with this so everybody votes to support it? Because to not support it hurts them, right? They're shooting themselves in the foot if they don't vote for this. So the combination of the work we had done ahead of time, the relationship that we had with Commissioner Maciejewski, his determination to make sure that his residents and the rest of them, and I never say citizens, I say residents in the county have access to this. Again, it was a combination of relentlessly going after this drip by drip by drip. And bless his heart, I was calling him every week, Jason, why isn't this on the agenda? I thought this was coming up. Was it, Barb? I got it. I'm putting this together. I'm putting this. I said, okay, it's on you. It's on you. So at some point, I then had to step back and trust that he would do his part to make this happen. But again, without all of the people involved, like you said, Jason, I mean, there's no one person driving this car. It's a whole bunch of people who are behind it, shoulder to the wheel, making sure the validity of the need is reinforced and the commitment to eventually do this. But you got to stay on them.
And eventually
they voted yes to get rid of me, right?
Eventually you will get to the point where you feel like instead of being the locomotive at the front of the train, that you're the locomotive at the back of the train.
Yeah.
Where if you're not telling your data or telling your story through data, someone else is, and it may not be the story that you want them to hear. Your community data helps drive the needs conversation, both locally, at the state, and at the federal level. So participate as much as you can in research studies, communicating using data, and people will hear and will come to help.
I love an exhortation to participate in research studies as a researcher. I think that's fantastic. Pierrette, I have a question for you and then for our champions. By the way, do you all like just being referred to champions all the time? Perhaps that can be added to your business cards.
A little imposter syndrome going there on that one, but okay.
Lean into it, Barb.
Okay, all right.
Pierrette, this kind of research, qualitative research in general, and this kind of research, it takes time. You were able to do this because you had pre-existing relationships, and then you built upon these, and then you just became a fixture in all of these folks' lives. I mean, I'm sure they're sick of talking to you.
Yes.
A little bit about the process.
Yeah, that is one thing that I would love to clarify a little bit about qualitative research. Quantitative research can also take a lot of time, but qualitative research is a lot more in depth that people, I believe, who aren't necessarily in this field of science understand. So it's not just having an interview or one conversation. It's triangulating data and information. So it's talking to our champions, people that worked alongside them, people who lived in the community. It's pouring through public records and public documents, because as a qualitative researcher, you yourself are acting as an instrument of the research. So you're trying to understand not only the factual events that happened, the actions that happened, the results of those actions, but then also the real gold in qualitative research is exactly what we've demonstrated here. It's understanding the motivations or the reasons behind what happened. Maybe all of the unwritten things that wouldn't come across in quantitative science, like what some of the struggles were. And I think that not only does that help paint this more robust and deeper understanding of some of the things that's happened in a community, but it also helps other people connect in a way that you may not be able to connect if you're just looking at something like a quantitative research project. So this is a project that spanned the course of a year. It began years and years and years ago, because I've been working with all these individuals now probably since 2018 or 2019, somewhere along there. So it's been a long journey. And then the research itself was more than a year-long process of interviews and going through community research and talking to people that they worked with and those sorts of things. So it is quite a process. And then you have all of that information and you've got to analyze it and code it and write it and try to figure out how you're going to organize certain things. So it is a much more in-depth process than you would imagine.
And we could never get sick of talking to Pierrette. But Pierrette was kind enough to be interviewed for my qualitative inquiry class for my data science degree. So I got to experience the other side of the inquiry.
Hi, Josh. I will miss my monthly check-ins with Pierrette about her work. They were always incredibly fascinating. I think we actually have an audience question that I'm going to toss up there. And I think it's aimed for all of the champions. Angela is asking, what's one thing you would have done differently in your experiences of bringing broadband to your communities? Everyone's pondering.
I think one of the frustrations that I've had, we have 5 different ISPs that are doing the build out in Washtenaw County. The big guys are difficult to wrangle. I'll just go on the record. Comcast is one of the most difficult companies to work with that I have ever encountered. There is a mindset that is very corporate and not, in my opinion, community-based. If it's not profit-driven, that was one of the biggest hurdles. All of these deployments, the ARPA money is now subsidizing private corporations to build their infrastructure that they then own, control the traffic that runs on it, with the exception of Linden Township. They built their own infrastructure through a bond that they passed a millage to pay off. I think it was a 20-year millage up there. But it wouldn't have happened without corporations seeing a profit in it. And one of my biggest frustrations, I didn't have to play that card. I wanted to out them. I wanted to out them in terms of their, in my opinion, greedy motivation.
All right, I think it took me a while to come up with something to answer this with, but I think I have one. What I believe should have happened from the beginning and needed an advocate to make happen is a central, at least in our region, a central repository for all geographic data. Because I think what we are going to need in the long term is that central place where the most current data is about the state of the infrastructure at any given moment. Because we keep thinking about the now, and we're not thinking enough about what happens when chaos takes place in the market and the ISPs start buying each other out, and you don't. So I think what we really need to be looking for here is we've got to figure out a way to ensure that over time we can have a sustainable network that really delivers to everybody and consistently does it for the new construction, for all of it. Not enough emphasis on that.
Thank you, John. I had a question for the 3 of you also in that, how much did you know about what the others were doing? Did you take inspiration? I think, Jason, you mentioned Washtenaw County's work earlier. How much did you learn from each other?
Merritt kept us connected to some degree, so they were kind of the tether to some of what else was going on around the state. I know I was in regular communication with people from Merritt almost every 3rd week or so on just a catch-up call, just what's going on. But honestly, Washtenaw County was the rabbit here, and we were all sort of watching as they did their thing. And here's how they did this, and here's what they're doing on that. So sometimes, thank goodness there's the rabbits out there that are willing to get out into on the edge of it, really push the edge of the envelope, maybe make mistakes that the rest of us can learn from, maybe not. But yeah, we were paying attention to those who were out ahead of us.
And Pierrette, because of someone in the comments has also brought up Linden Township and Barb brought up Linden Township, I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about your work with Holland, because that would also be a public ISP.
Yeah, Holland is located right about here in Michigan, and they actually offer their internet service through the Board of Public Works. So the Board of Public Works didn't offer internet service until I want to say maybe just a year or two ago. They had been providing high-speed broadband to the downtown business corridor, but then actually ran a public information campaign in order to pass a millage to support the build out and the running of the network in the community.
So is that the city of Holland, Pierrette?
Yes.
What county are they in?
They span 2 counties, Barb. So the top half of Holland is in Ottawa, and then the bottom half, I don't remember.
And what about those people outside the city?
That's a good question.
I see. So rare.
A quick fact-based question. Any of the Michigan electric cooperatives deliver broadband or fiber to rural communities?
Oh,
they do.
Gosh. Yes. In our region, there's a co-op called the Midwest Energy and Communications Co-op, and they are incredible. They were into fiber at the very front end of this, and then just decided to scale up big. And it's incredible what they're doing. It's such an unbelievable asset in our region. The level of service, the cost of it, just the way they cater to their customers, unbelievable. It's really a huge asset.
Yeah, MEC is my provider. And they were ahead of the game. They anticipated supply chain issues and they stockpiled glass. So when the contracts came through to build, they had the materials, and I believe they were also ramping up the labor, the workforce, to actually be able to do the deployments, which, as we all know, became a real challenge. Once all this money got pushed into the system. Great, but we don't have anybody to do the work that knows what they're doing. So yeah, I'm with you. Very happy with MEC.
And in our region, we have Cloverland Electric Cooperative, who, through our infrastructure planning, the economic feasibility for our member-owned cooperative to try to rapidly get into the business of delivering broadband internet access was not economically feasible. So we focused more of our efforts through relationships to develop partnerships around the infrastructure to the mutual benefit of the utility and the electric cooperative and the telecommunications providers.
We are coming up to the hour, and I was told to leave the last couple of minutes for the champions to turn the tables on Pierrette and ask her a question. So I will toss it to one of you.
So I have one question for Pierrette. Pierrette, you recently participated in a paper for the TPRC conference, and in that paper, there was reference to a policy learning machine. What research question would you have related to what you've learned about what makes communities tick in advancing broadband infrastructure and connectivity and closing that digital divide? What's the one research question that you would have going forward based off what you learned and what you wrote in that paper?
Absolutely. That is a great question. So I'm actually working on a study right now with Dr. Megan Nittle at Michigan State University based on the work that we've done in these communities. Right. One thing that I've noticed is that local policy plays a very big role in connectivity and how far people get in digital skilling and digital equity. So the research question that I would have based on my experiences here, if I was going to do a study, which we just have recently begun, is in what way does or should local policy influence connectivity and digital equity, and how should local policy and local context be considered when developing policy on a regional or on a state level?
And I would be very excited to find out what you do as you continue this research. Those important policy levers at a local level are really going to be quite crucial in delivering the fruits of the IIJ investment. I want to thank all four of you for participating in today's webinar. Barb, John, Jason, Pierrette, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody watching today.
Thank you.
Thank you.